He thought she was just another quiet girl, easy to humiliate, easy to break. But when the school bully pushed too far, he had no idea who was coming to pick her up and what was coming next. At Maplewood Academy, power wasn't just about money. It was about who your parents were, who your family knew, and whether you belonged. And if you didn't, you were an easy target. No one knew that better than Naomi Carter. She didn't have a last name that meant something. She didn't get invited to exclusive parties. She wasn't part of their world. She was one of the few black students at an elite private school. And that meant from the moment she set foot in Maplewood Academy, she was already on the outside looking in. But she could deal with that. She could handle being ignored, being invisible. What she wasn't prepared for was Landon Hayes. Because he didn't just ignore her, he made sure she knew she wasn't welcome. The rules of Maplewood Landon wasn't just another student. He was the kind of kid who owned every room he walked into. The kind that made teachers laugh at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. The kind that never faced consequences no matter what he did. The kind of kid who could ruin someone's life and still be called a good boy by the principal. And Naomi, she was the perfect target. She wasn't rich, she wasn't connected, and most importantly, she didn't fight back. At first, it was small things. A casual shoulder check in the hallway, a locker mysteriously jammed shut right before class, a teacher ignoring it when Landon's friends accidentally knocked her books to the floor, things that could be laughed off, things that weren't really bullying, just kids being kids. Except it never stopped there. The cafeteria incident Friday, lunchtime. Naomi sat alone at her usual spot, picking at her sandwich. She had gotten used to the whispers behind her back. She had learned to ignore the casual jokes, the little snickers, the way people stared. She was used to it. But Landon, he wanted to make sure she felt it. A shadow fell across her table. She didn't even have to look up. She already knew who it was. "What's on the menu today, Carter? Government cheese and food stamps?" Laughter erupted from his table. Naomi kept her eyes on her tray. Landon smirked. "What? Nothing to say? You should thank me. I'm just making sure you feel included." Then, he grabbed her drink and poured it all over her tray. The cafeteria went silent. Naomi froze. Her fingers curled under the table. Not here, not now. Don't react. Landon leaned in closer. "You know this school isn't for people like you. You'll never fit in here." That was it. That was the moment she should have fought back. That was the moment she should have stood up and told him to stop. But she didn't, because she knew exactly how this would go. The principal would say it was a misunderstanding. The teachers would tell her to ignore it. The students would keep laughing behind her back. So she did the only thing she could. She stood up and walked away. She wouldn't let him see her break. But inside, she was shaking. The worst part, it wasn't the drink on her tray. It wasn't even the words he said. It was the silence. The way no one did anything. The way the teachers in the corner pretended not to see. The way the students who knew it was wrong just kept their heads down. Because this was Maplewood Academy. And Landon Hayes was untouchable. What she didn't know. That night, Naomi went home without saying a word. She didn't tell her dad. She didn't want to hear him say, "I'll handle it," because she already knew how this would go. Nothing would change, except she was wrong, because Landon wasn't done, and the next time he came after her, he would go too far, and that's when he would finally learn. Naomi Carter wasn't as alone as he thought. The bully took it too far. And that's when everything changed at Maplewood Academy. Landon Hayes was untouchable. He wasn't just another rich kid. He was the rich kid. The one with the perfect family name, the right connections, and the kind of charm that could turn any teacher's scolding into a slap on the wrist. He had power. And Naomi Carter? She had none. At least that's what Landon thought. Because when you push someone too far, you don't just break them, you make them dangerous. The escalation begins. It started with little things, shoving her books off her desk, blocking her locker so she couldn't get inside, a well-timed accidental trip that sent her stumbling in the hallway. All of it designed to make Naomi feel small, but she refused to react. And that pissed Landon off. Bullies thrive on reactions, on the fear, the anger, the humiliation. Naomi wasn't giving him any of that, so he pushed harder. The lie that spread like fire. Monday morning, Naomi walked into school, feeling the weight of exhaustion. She was tired of being targeted, tired of the whispers, tired of Landon. But she had no idea what was waiting for her, because this time, Landon wasn't just playing games. He was destroying reputations. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed something off. Students staring, whispering, some laughing. Her stomach twisted. Then she heard it. "Did you hear? Naomi tried to fight Landon on Friday." Her breath caught. She totally lost it. They had to hold her back. Her pulse pounded. What? None of that was true, but it didn't matter. The lie had already spread, and at the center of it all, Landon sitting at his usual table, smirking. The cafeteria humiliation. By lunchtime, Naomi couldn't escape it. Everywhere she walked, students whispered. Some pointed, some laughed, some just watched, waiting to see if she'd snap. And then Landon made sure the whole school saw. As she walked past his table, his voice rang out. "Hey, Carter, you still mad about Friday?" The cafeteria went quiet. Naomi stopped in her tracks. She turned slowly, locking eyes with him. Landon grinned. "I mean, it's kinda sad. You really thought you could take me." Laughter rippled through the room. Naomi's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream that it wasn't true. She wanted to demand that someone, anyone, stand up for her. But she already knew the truth. No one would, so she did the only thing she could. She walked away, and behind her, Landon's laughter followed. The final straw. If that had been it, Naomi might have let it go. She might have stayed quiet, hoping that eventually Landon would get bored. But Landon, he wasn't done. He needed to make sure she didn't just walk away. He needed to ruin her. So he did the one thing he knew would break her. He took it online. The viral attack Tuesday morning. Naomi stepped into school, still feeling the weight of yesterday. But today was worse. Because now it wasn't just whispers. It was screens. Phones held up in every direction. Students scrolling, laughing, showing each other something. And then she saw it. A picture of her. But it wasn't real. Someone had edited the image, making it look like she was furious, wild-eyed, mid-scream. And across the top, "Ghetto girl can't control herself." The world tilted. Naomi's breath came in short gasps, and the comments, "Wow, she looks insane. No wonder she doesn't have any friends. Bet she lashes out when she doesn't get her free lunch." Her stomach churned. Landon hadn't just lied about her. He had made sure the whole school saw her as a joke. And as she stood there frozen in the hallway, she felt it. The last piece of her patience snap. She was done being silent. Naomi barely made it through the school day. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't eat. She didn't even go to her last class. Because she wasn't just humiliated. She was angry. For months, she had let Landon walk all over her. She had let the teachers ignore it. She had let the students pretend it wasn't happening. She had let Landon believe he was untouchable. But this was too far. And Landon was about to find out that Naomi Carter wasn't going to be his victim anymore. The phone call that changed everything. That afternoon, Naomi walked into her house, her fingers trembling. She had planned to lock herself in her room, to sit in silence, to figure out what to do next. But she never got the chance, because her father was already waiting, and he had his phone in his hand. On the screen, the same photo that had been spreading through school. Naomi! His voice was steady, too steady. Sit down. Her stomach twisted. She barely managed to whisper, I didn't do anything. Her father's jaw tightened. I know, a pause. Then before she could say another word, he was already dialing. Principal Harris, we need to talk. Now. The police chief's daughter was bullied until he stepped in. Landon Hayes thought he was untouchable. He was the golden boy of Maplewood Academy, the kid who could do anything and never face the consequences. He had the right name, the right family, the right connections. And Naomi Carter? She had none of that. So when he started targeting her, he thought no one would stop him. What he didn't know? Naomi's father wasn't just another parent. He was the town's new police chief. And when Landon pushed too far, he learned the hard way what real power looked like. The call that changed everything Tuesday afternoon. Naomi walked into the house, her hands still shaking. She had spent the entire day pretending she was okay, ignoring the whispers, avoiding eye contact, acting like she didn't care that Landon had turned her into a joke. But the moment she stepped through the door, she knew something was different. Her father was sitting in the living room, his phone in his hand, and on the screen, the same edited photo of her that had been spreading through school. Naomi. His voice was calm, too calm. She swallowed hard. I didn't do anything. His eyes darkened. I know. A pause. Then before she could say another word, he was already dialing. Principal Harris, we need to talk. Now. And just like that, everything changed. The meeting that no one saw coming. An hour later, inside Principal Harris's office, the air was thick with tension. On one side of the desk, Chief Carter. On the other, Landon, his parents, and the principal himself. Landon wasn't smirking now. His father, Richard Hayes, the school's biggest donor, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking annoyed. I don't see why this needed to escalate, he said smoothly. Chief Carter didn't blink. Your son created and spread racist, defamatory content about my daughter. Mr. Hayes let out a short chuckle. Come on, they're just kids. It was a joke. The silence that followed was heavy. Chief Carter leaned forward. If Naomi had done this to your son, would we be sitting here? Or would you already have a lawyer lined up? Mr. Hayes' jaw clenched. Principal Harris cleared his throat. We, take these matters seriously. Chief Carter's voice hardened. Then take action. A pause. Then the decision was made. Landon Hayes, suspended. His father's face turned red. This is outrageous. Do you know how much I've donated to this school? Chief Carter met his gaze without hesitation. Do you know how many cases of harassment I've seen start like this? And how they end? Silence. Landon shifted uncomfortably in his seat because for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. The downfall of Landon Hayes. By the next morning, everyone at Maplewood Academy had heard the news. Landon Hayes, suspended. His father had tried to pull strings, call favors, even threaten the school board. But this time, it didn't work because Chief Carter hadn't just called the principal. He had called the school district. He had called the mayor. He had called everyone who needed to hear what had happened. And now, Landon's family name wasn't protecting him anymore. The whispers in the hallways weren't about Naomi now. They were about him. Did you hear? His dad tried to make it go away. Yeah, but it didn't work. The police chief shut it down. Dude, he's actually leaving the school. And by the end of the week, Landon Hayes was gone. Naomi walked through school. Different now. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking with her head down. For months, she had let Landon believe he controlled the story, that he could rewrite the truth, that he could treat her however he wanted, that no one would ever stand up for her. But now, she knew better. She had seen what real power looked like. And it wasn't Landon's money. It wasn't his name. It wasn't his fake charm. It was justice. And justice had finally come for him. The fall of Landon Hayes, and how the whole school turned against him for years. Landon Hayes ruled Maplewood Academy. He was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. Teachers loved him, students feared him, and anyone who dared to stand up to him, they were crushed. For months, he had bullied Naomi Carter, thinking she was just another easy target. But when he pushed too far, when his cruelty became impossible to ignore, his whole world came crashing down. Because this time, he wasn't just fighting Naomi. He was fighting her father, the police chief. And when the dust settled, Landon Hayes wasn't untouchable anymore. The day Landon lost everything Thursday morning, Naomi walked into school expecting the same whispers, the same stares, the same looks of pity. But today was different. The moment she stepped through the doors, she felt it, a shift in the air. Students weren't whispering about her anymore. They were whispering about him. She heard it before she even reached her locker. "Dude, did you hear? Yeah, he's actually suspended, like for real this time." His dad tried to cover it up, but the police chief shut it down. Naomi's fingers tightened around her backpack strap. She hadn't expected it to happen so fast. But there it was. The school had finally turned on Landon, and it was only the beginning. The moment Landon realized he was done by lunchtime, the news had spread everywhere. Landon Hayes, the guy who used to control the school with just a smirk, was now the one being watched. But this time, the looks weren't admiration. They were judgment, disgust, amusement. When he walked into the cafeteria, students turned away. No one laughed at his jokes. No one saved him a seat. Even his closest friends seemed a little too quiet. For the first time, Landon was experiencing what it felt like to be on the outside. And Naomi, she just sat back and watched, because she didn't have to do anything. He was destroying himself. The last straw. By the end of the day, Landon had gone from being the most feared guy in school to being the most talked about joke. And then it got worse, because someone had done what no one ever dared to do before. They exposed him. Right before the last bell rang, students started checking their phones. A new post was going viral on Maplewood Student Forum. Naomi heard the gasps before she even saw it. And when she finally looked at the screen, she almost didn't believe it. It was screenshots, real messages. Every cruel, racist, disgusting thing Landon had ever said in private. She's probably just some ghetto kid who got a scholarship. Why does she even try? No one actually wants her here. I could ruin her life and no one would even care. And the worst part? The timestamps showed he had said them all recently. The school exploded. Holy crap, he actually said this? And he thinks he's the victim. This dude's done. Naomi slowly exhaled. Landon hadn't just lost control, he had lost everything. Landon faces the consequences for the first time ever. The next morning, Naomi walked into school expecting to see Landon acting like nothing had happened. But he wasn't there. He wasn't at his usual table. He wasn't with his group. He wasn't anywhere. And that's when she heard it. His parents pulled him out. Yeah, they're transferring him to a private school out of state. Guess Daddy's money couldn't fix this one. Naomi blinked. He was gone, just like that. For so long, she had thought Landon was untouchable, that no matter what he did, he would always get away with it. But now, he was nothing but a cautionary tale. The school wasn't the same anymore. Landon was gone, but that didn't mean the school went back to normal, because for the first time, people were actually talking about what had happened. Students whispered in the hallways. Teachers looked uncomfortable. Even the principal, the same one who had ignored Naomi's complaints for months, suddenly started making announcements about safe spaces and zero tolerance for bullying. It was fake. It was all about damage control. But Naomi didn't care, because at least now they weren't ignoring it. And that was a start. The people who finally spoke up. A few days later, Naomi was at her locker when she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned and saw Jake Simmons, one of Landon's old friends. For a second, she expected him to throw another insult at her. But instead, he looked guilty. Hey, he scratched the back of his neck. What he did, it was messed up. Naomi narrowed her eyes. And he hesitated. I should have said something sooner. Naomi studied him for a moment, then shrugged. Yeah, you should have. Jake swallowed hard. And then he walked away, because there wasn't anything left to say. The damage had already been done. But at least now, people were finally seeing it. Naomi wasn't afraid anymore. For months she had walked through Maplewood Academy feeling small, feeling invisible, feeling like no one cared what happened to her. But now, she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel invisible, and she definitely didn't feel powerless, because she had learned something Landon never did. Power isn't about how many people fear you, it's about how many people respect you. And Naomi? She had earned that respect, not by fighting back, not by sinking to Landon's level, but by surviving him. And the next time someone like him tried to do the same thing, she knew one thing for sure. People wouldn't stay silent, not anymore. Bullying and racism thrive in silence. Until someone fights back for months, Naomi Carter was ignored, not just by her classmates, not just by her teachers, but by an entire system that was built to protect kids like Landon Hayes. She wasn't the first person he had bullied. She wasn't the first Black student who had been treated like she didn't belong. And if no one had stepped in, she wouldn't have been the last. Because bullies like Landon, they don't stop unless someone makes them. And racism, it doesn't disappear until people refuse to stay silent. Silence is what gives bullies power. For weeks, Naomi thought the best thing she could do was ignore it. She told herself that if she just kept her head down, if she stayed out of trouble, if she didn't react, Landon would get bored. But she was wrong. Because bullies like him, they feed on silence. The more she ignored him, the worse it got. The casual insults turned into humiliation. The pushing in the hallways turned into a full-on smear campaign. The mean jokes turned into a public attack on her identity. And the worst part? No one spoke up. Not the students who saw what was happening. Not the teachers who turned away. Not the principal who pretended it was just kids being kids. Because that's how bullying works. It survives when people stay silent. It grows when people pretend it's not a big deal. It thrives when people say, that's just how things are. But when Naomi's father stepped in, when he refused to ignore it, everything changed. Racism doesn't always look like what you expect. Some people think racism is obvious, that it's only about slurs and violence. But Naomi knew the truth. Sometimes racism was quieter. It was the way teachers ignored her struggles, but bent over backwards for kids like Landon. It was the way no one defended her when Landon spread rumors, but the second he faced consequences, people started feeling bad for him. It was the way she was expected to just deal with it, because kids like her, they weren't supposed to cause trouble. That's what made Landon so dangerous. It wasn't just that he was cruel, it was that he knew he could get away with it. And he almost did. The power of fighting back. The moment Naomi's father called out the system, everything changed. Suddenly, the principal couldn't ignore it. The teachers couldn't look away. The students had to pick a side. And when Landon finally faced real consequences, something incredible happened. People started speaking up. The same students who had whispered behind her back, Now they were saying out loud what they had been thinking all along. Landon's been a jerk for years. He deserved what he got. I should have said something sooner. Because the truth is, most people aren't bad. They're just afraid. Afraid to be the next target. Afraid to lose social status. Afraid to stand up and say, this isn't okay. But when one person fights back, it gives others the courage to do the same. Why this story matters. Naomi's story isn't just about one bully. It's not just about one racist kid in one school. It's about something bigger. Because what happened to Naomi happens every single day in classrooms, in workplaces, in neighborhoods. Bullies thrive when people look the other way. Racism survives when people pretend it's not real. And the only way to stop it is to refuse to stay silent. What you can do. So what's the lesson here? Because not everyone has a police chief or a father. Not everyone has someone who can step in and fight for them. But here's the thing. You don't have to be a police chief to make a difference. All it takes, one person willing to say, that's not okay. If you see someone being bullied, speak up. If you hear someone making racist jokes, call it out. If you know someone is struggling, support them. Because you never know, you might be the only person who does. And for them, that might change everything. This is bigger than one school. Naomi's story had a happy ending, but not every story does. Some kids don't get justice. Some kids never get to see their bullies face consequences. Some kids don't survive the cruelty. And that's why we have to keep talking about it. Because the more we talk about it, the harder it is for people to ignore. The more we fight back, the less power bullies have. And the next time someone like Landon tries to do the same thing, maybe, just maybe, they won't get away with it. Final message. If you take nothing else from this story, remember this. Bullying doesn't stop until people make it stop. Racism doesn't disappear until people refuse to accept it. And if you ever find yourself in Naomi's position, know this. Your voice matters. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to take it. And most importantly, you are not alone. Standing against injustice. A lesson for all generations' life teaches us that silence in the face of wrongdoing only empowers those who seek to harm others. Whether it is bullying, discrimination, or injustice, staying quiet allows the cycle to continue. The story of Naomi Carter reminds us that courage does not always mean fighting with fists. It means standing firm, refusing to be diminished, and speaking up when others cannot. Too often we assume that someone else will intervene, that it is not our place to get involved. But real change happens when ordinary people take a stand. For older generations, this lesson is even more powerful. Many have witnessed or experienced moments of prejudice, cruelty, or exclusion. The responsibility to guide the younger generation lies in passing down the wisdom that dignity and respect should never be compromised. We must encourage others to use their voices, to defend what is right, and to never tolerate mistreatment as just the way things are. Every act of courage, no matter how small, inspires another. And when enough people stand against injustice, it loses its power. It is never too late to be the person who makes a difference. Because doing the right thing has no age limit.